Welcome back to the show. We are talking about vendor management today with expert Vicky McKim. Vicky, now I want to touch on the COVID-19 and vendor management. Do you think there's going to be a change in how vendor management is looked at in the coming months and maybe years, considering what the pandemic has done to so many countries, organizations, regions? Do you feel there might be a change here?
Yeah, it's probably going to put a lot of pressure on the supply chain. So when you look at being able to acquire raw materials, we saw that even in the grocery sector, just being able to get things from one place to another with things shut down, and that the shortages that we saw. We saw the toilet paper shortages of all things, right?
Yeah.
And the meat shortages now because of the packing plants. And so some of those limits. So it depends on the industry and what you're relying on. I know we've seen I'm in the Midwest, and we've seen some of the menus on our takeout orders change, like they don't have chicken today or they don't have beef today. And so if you're trying to get takeout orders, sometimes those things aren't available. And then there's always the price increases as well.
Now, I've also I read an article a little while ago. I can't remember if it was online, what site it was online. But there was the thought that when it comes to suppliers and vendors, that a lot of organizations may start changing their vendors to start looking at something more local or regional, people to deal with because of what COVID-19 has done. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think people are going to start looking at those backup vendors. Maybe you're doing business with someone nationally. As long as they're able to deliver, you're fine continuing that relationship. But if it's not available under those current service contracts, you've got to bring in somebody who can supply those things locally. Things like hand sanitizer. Like, we haven't been able to get as much as we wanted, but we found a local brewery that was actually making 60 proof sanitizer that could be purchased by the gallon. And so that's what we've been using and putting it in our own dispensers. And so those are things that, looking at the additional cost of doing business now because of the sanitation. Obviously, when you're looking at your cleaning contracts for your facilities where you have people, that's another thing that has to be considered as an additional cost of doing business now, because you're going to have cleaning more often. Can you put down some microbial barriers? Do you need to add additional barriers between your workstations if you have an open floor plan, which a lot of companies do now? And so there's a number of things that have to be looked at, and what's the cost and what's the benefit, and is it less expensive to let go of the real estate? So that's another thing that people have started to ask. What about all this commercial real estate? Do we need it now? Does it mean more commercial real estate is going to be needed because you're trying to spread people out and not sit them so close together? Or does it mean people just work from home? And so I think it's too early to tell on some of this, but there's a lot of potential for disruption of, obviously the normal business environment as we've known it up until January.
Well, hopefully we don't end up with those awful cubicles like they used to be with the 5-foot high walls and you were stuck in a cube. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned the hand sanitizer. There is a brewery here in Guelph where I live that started doing the exact same thing. I think quite a few breweries did that to help fill that gap. So I'm sure for them, they could become a vendor. You could be an IT company and all of a sudden you're partnering with a brewery, but it has nothing to do with any beverage.
I think one of the other things that comes to mind too is your HVAC provider. someone who manages that for you, you're going to be wanting to look at, can they use HEPA filtration? Are there additional kinds of microbial cleaners that they can use to clean the air? Is there kind of an ionizing thing that they can do? Can you use UV, C light to sanitize things? I mean, there's all types of things now that people are going to be looking at. The cameras that mount to take temperatures of people with no touch, and being able to monitor that flow of people in and out of your building. So there's a whole new gamut of risks that we didn't have during a normal flu season. And so we've lived with flu for a long time. This is a little bit different for sure. And so when you're thinking about how to secure those workplaces, there's a lot to consider and a lot to figure out. How are we going to do this and do it safely for our employees?
Now, I want to circle back with something from the very beginning. I made a note, and I just noticed I didn't give myself a tick mark here. You mentioned subcontractors. Now, if I'm talking with vendors, 5 vendors, and I'm asking about their programs, their training, their BCPs, et cetera, like that, what kind of things do I ask when it comes to subcontractors?
So there's 2 things that I would ask. First of all, I would ask if my vendor has a vendor management program where they do something similar to what I'm asking of them. The second thing I'm asking is if they are hiring a subcontractor, how are they supervising those projects that subcontractor is working on? Is there daily contact? Is there just a weekly meeting? When I go back to the pipe bursting, had my building manager been appropriately overseeing the project, what happened would not have. That pipe would not have been cut. They would have recognized it and immediately tagged that one out had they been watching and supervising when all of the work was being done. And so those are 2 things that you can do, just vetting that they have a vendor management program and that they're appropriately vetting the people that they work for, and then also just the supervision of those contractors when they're on your premise.
Do I need to know who they are, or is it something I should ask, or is the confirmation that they do have a vendor management program really, is that better? Does that answer that?
I always want to know who's in my building, and what are they doing, and who's watching them. After all of the things that I've had happen, I absolutely want to know.
You've had things happen?
Oh my gosh. One day I got a call from a lady and she said a man just fell past my window. And I'm like, what? What did you say? And it was actually a window washer. The building manager had hired someone to come in and wash the windows for the building. He hadn't vetted this company, and that company had not trained the employee, and they worked on a windy day, and they fell to their death. And everyone in our office ran to the window. They were in a conference room in a meeting when he fell past. And, of course, they're not thinking. They ran to the window. They looked down. They were on the 12th floor. And I had 2 months of people having nightmares and trauma that affected productivity, obviously, in that office, just because of the trauma of what they saw. And so, again, when you go back to managing your vendor and the subcontractors that they have working, you really, really do want to take an active interest in how they're managing those vendors and how they're vetting those vendors before they hire them.
Now, my next question actually relates to some of those risk controls. Do you suggest that one person look after that, or do you suggest that with regards to vendor management, that there's a little piece in the responsibilities of the BCM person or the facilities person? How do you place vendor management within an organization to manage these controls?
Yeah, my recommendation is to put it under the risk management department, but you have contributors to that. So, I'm not a facilities expert, and so I want to have our facility manager. I want them to look at the answers I'm getting back from those vendors if it's related to finances, because we ask for financial reports. I can't analyze that appropriately, and so I would be asking our finance, our CFO, to take a look at that, make sure everything looks good. Same with the IT area. I'm not an expert enough. I know enough to be dangerous, but I want those expert eyes looking at those things and making sure that everything seems appropriate and that they feel comfortable using that vendor. So even though it comes up under risk management, absolutely you want to get others who have the expertise involved in analyzing the data that does come back.
Oh, okay. Well, we've got 2 minutes left, roughly 2 minutes left. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to bring up about vendor management that maybe we didn't cover here, or something you'd like to recover? Or?
Sure. One thing comes to mind. It can be very simple or it can be very complicated. And even if all you do is create a spreadsheet and just have a list of questions and interview your vendors, even that is going to help you identify and reduce some of your risks. If you're regulated in any way, I always recommend that you start there. What do the regulations require? And then making sure that your vendors can meet that with you. If you're meeting those, then you absolutely want your vendors to meet those requirements, especially when it comes around data security. You want to make sure that whoever your vendor is, they're meeting those requirements as well. So even from a simple spreadsheet, I know there are lots of platforms. We've actually built one of our own and incorporated risk management into it, and it ties in with all of our BIAs and then all of our business recovery plans. And so it's phenomenal. We love it. And can't say enough good about that particular product. But again, whether you do it very simply or whether you choose to utilize a platform that may be out of the box that you can configure for your business, you do want to manage it in one way or another and not just leave it to chance.
Right. Well, on that, we've come to the end of our show. Vicky, thank you very much. You gave us a lot of information regarding vendor management, and I really appreciate your expertise and sharing your time with us. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.